Good morning or good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Regina Yao, and I'm moderating the second YouTube panel session in our second annual Fathers for Pixels livestream series. Now, before I go further, I just want to let everyone know that I'm having a cold. So if I sound hoarse or I go off in a coughing fit, yes, it's normal. I'm not dying as my small students aged between 11 to 13 seem to think I am. So let's get back to it. Through the Fathers for Pixels YouTube panel sessions, the Pixel Project is providing a platform and learning resource for fathers across the world to step up to speak out about the importance of combating violence against women. So for this year's series, we're collaborating with MenChallenging, an organization comprising men who are working towards a more equitable and violence-free world for women and girls by actively addressing sexism, misogyny, and toxic masculinity among their male peers. So this June's Fathers for Pixels campaign features 7 fathers and experts from different walks of life, and each live stream YouTube session will feature 2 to 3 panelists discussing a topic that links fatherhood and how dads can help stop violence against women in their families, communities, and cultures. Now, each session will also include a live moderated Q&A session for dads and communities to ask questions. So our topic today is Fathers Raising Feminist Sons, featuring the Samalin family. And I'm going to put them all on screen now. So here to take part in the discussion are 2 generations of men in the Samalin family, including Joe Samalin. So Joe was born and raised in New York City and has been working on issues of gender-based violence for over 20 years. He has worked with numerous organizations in NYC, nationally and internationally, including Men Can Stop Rape and Breakthrough. Currently, he works as a consultant to help engage men and boys in preventing gender violence. He has designed and facilitated trainings, curricula, and men's engagement programs, and has delivered hundreds of talks, lectures, and workshops relating to gender violence. In 2019, he co-founded MenChallenging, an online campaign challenging men to directly support survivors of gender violence and to take action to prevent it. Next, we have Matt. And Matt is Joe's brother and likewise born and raised in New York City. He attended State University of New York, purchased for an undergraduate degree in performance, and is currently finishing up a how do we say that, Matt?
PsyD, correct, yep.
PsyD, yeah, as a school psychologist. He is currently working as a counselor to college and university students and lives with his partner Bella and their son Oliver in upstate New York. And last but not least, Rich Samalin is the patriarch of the Samalin family. He was born and raised in the Bronx, New York, and was a talented athlete and musician from high school onwards. He's a classically trained bass player, recording engineer, composer, and more. He currently works as the sole audio engineer to George, is it Guidall or Guidall?
Goodell.
Excuse me, my pronunciation today is shot. Heralded as the top audiobook voice over artists today. Now you, the YouTube audience, will also be able to ask them questions live. Just make sure you're logged into your YouTube account. That's also your Google account, so that you can type your questions into the chat box to the right of the YouTube screen. And Anushya, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to read out to our panel to answer. And now onwards to our panel session with a quick little intro about why we're doing this session today called Fathers Raising Feminist Sons. Now, we at the Pixel Project believe that dads can and should be key allies to the movement to end violence against women. So in 2012, we started our engagement with dads worldwide by organizing the annual 30 for 30 marathon blog interview series in June to honor Father's Day, while enabling fathers worldwide to speak through written interviews about fatherhood and what dads can do to stop sexism, misogyny, and violence against women in their communities wherever they are in the world. Then in 2020, we decided to revamp and expand it into Fathers for Pixels, a multi-pronged program as part of growing with the changes in online communities and technological advances. So the 30 for 30 interview series became the Voices of Dads Against Violence Against Women series, which is open for submissions year-round to make it more accessible for dads to participate whenever they are ready. And we started our first Fathers for Pixels YouTube livestream series, featuring dads and experts worldwide discussing topics ranging from parenting to role modeling to tackling sexism and misogyny and violence against women. So in general, the Fathers for Pixels livestream panel series features dads and experts tackling the big issues. But in recognition that fathers are the first male role models in most people's lives and a major factor in whether today's boys will grow up to become non-sexist, non-misogynist men, we created a Fathers Raising Feminist Sons session. This session is designed to feature 2 or more generations of men from families that have demonstrated by example that progressive, conscientious, and non-sexist fathering is part of the foundation needed to raise men to break the cycle of toxic masculinity and male pattern violence. So every year we will focus on one family. And this year, Joe and his family have very kindly agreed to join us. And with all this in mind, our first question to kick off today's discussion is directed at Rich and Matt, who are the dads attending today's panel. So let's start off with, what is the best thing about being a dad? Let's start with Rich.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for the question. The best thing about being a father, to me, as a non-expert, regular guy dad, are these 2 gentlemen that you're staring at next to and above me on my screen. The best thing is being a father gives the opportunity to help create, mold, to some extent influence other young people to be their best, as opposed to, unfortunately, what we see all around us in every corner of the world. So being a dad gives us the chance to shine, or occasionally to fail, but gives me hope in the future. Even though it's a long time since they were 1 day old, 1 year old, 10 years old, 28 years old. I don't want to give away their exact, they may be feeling funny about the number. But even though that's true, I feel the pride, and I feel great respect for my sons, of who they are becoming always. And that's a refreshing and uplifting feeling within me that helps encourage me to also strive to be my best. Likewise, so we're kind of answering each other many times, most of the time without even talking about it, through behavior, through a glance, through watching someone when they don't know they're being watched, or thinking about someone when they don't know they're being thought about. It's a marvelous opportunity to be a father.
All right. Matt, what are your thoughts? What's the best thing about being a dad? Because Oliver's really little and he's so cute right now.
I'm very much aware that he is perhaps at his apex of cuteness at a year old, and it probably cuteness wise, it could only go down. Just kidding. No, I really respond to a lot of what my father said about particularly the opportunity, which I'm learning a lot more about, is he is finding his no voice and his burgeoning willpower. But it does consistently provide me with an opportunity to stay present, to stay consistent, and to, in a selfish way, I guess, have parts of me grow kind of with each interaction. If, you know, at least the opportunity is there for that. And then I can kind of, you know, relay some of those gifts and that growth to not only him, but to whoever else I interact with. So it is kind of like a call and response. I think my father was saying a little bit of this kind of interactive thing. But really also just like love waking up with him in the morning, like, because we still co-sleep a little bit, and just seeing his little face when I roll, you know, there's all the kind of silly things that I love. But yeah, providing opportunities to grow with him.
Yeah. So how has having Rich as your dad influenced the way you parent Oliver?
Yeah. You know, I think there was a lot of implicit messaging. You know, I think that's the lineage of American fatherhood, is that once in a while you'll have like an explicit message of like, do this, don't do that. But really, you know, we learn by watching, and we learn by so many other things when we're little, especially when we're like pre-verbal and things like that. So I think my father's approach to people in general, and his kind of loving, compassionate stance towards everybody that I've ever kind of brought around him, or anybody we've ever interacted with, he's always had a deep well of compassion and respect for other people. And I think that in setting and you know, that permeates through every interaction. When you learn that that's the right stance, or like that's what dad does, so this is what I want to do, it falls in line with so many values that I really aspire to now. So so that's what I try with Oliver, especially pre-verbally. It's not so much about like strong messaging and lessons. It's how can I show him, you know, patience and compassion and love.
Yeah. So Joe, you are the sole non-parent on this panel, but you're also the sole professional male ally who has worked for decades to teach men and boys how to dismantle and challenge sexism, misogyny, and violence against women. So how has having Rich as your dad influenced your choice of your line of work, your career?
I'm still sitting with Matt and Dad's answers. Thank you, guys. I've never had the opportunity in this kind of professional setting to speak with you all directly. I talk about you all a lot and what I've learned from you all, good, bad, and ugly, but this really means a lot to me. So I'm just kind of sitting here with that as well. And I have an answer for that question, but I also just want to bring into the virtual room here. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Regina, so much, even with a cold, for doing this, and for Pixel Project for all the incredible work you do. MenChallenging and me personally are thrilled to be a part of it, behind the scenes and sometimes in front of the scenes. But I have to bring in also and acknowledge all of the incredible women in our life and our family, both living and past, because I can't answer that question without also Regina talking about my mom and my cousin Heidi. Even though she was of my mom's, my grandmother's generation, she played a large role in raising both my mom and me and Matt, and was an integral part of the family, and taught us a lot also about these issues. As Matt said, not always explicitly, though sometimes, but also implicitly as well. And all of my partner, as well as all of my partner's family in India, who I think some are watching, for all the lessons that I've been learning from them too. I was blessed enough to fall into an incredible family of women and men and folks. With that said, I tell the story a lot in different ways, and Dad, maybe you can, correct me if I get anything wrong this time, but basically I do the work I do, and I see it not only as my work and career, but something I try and live just as a person. and I'm doing now less as a career and a quote unquote job than through my campaign and a bit of consulting work. My main job right now, and it's weird to say, is as a woodworker, which is very weird, but I'm trying to be a feminist woodworker and not only a professional feminist. I think we need that. We need more Matts out there being school therapists and dads out there being recording engineers and musicians as feminists and allies, as you said, Regina. I think that the main answer to that question of how, Dad, you've influenced me and how Mom has influenced me is that my dad and my mom both grew up in families that had violence, physical violence and sexual violence and other forms of violence committed, as many people unfortunately do, and as many boys in America also grow up either witnessing or experiencing. And I was in high school when I started to learn from my mom and my dad some of the stuff that they lived through and went through and experienced and witnessed. And I had no idea what to do with that information. I had no training on this. I had no idea what to do with it. And it changed the dynamics of our family in terms of grandparents and aunts and uncles and everything, and a lot of upheaval. And I went off to college with all that kind of brewing in my head and found some people on the college campus I went to that were thinking about these issues and talking about these issues. And I fell in with them. And it was a series of, in working with men in communities, I talk about aha moments where, because men in general are privileged not to really think about these issues 24/7 like some other folks are. Yeah, I had a series of aha moments that this stuff, it's an issue. Physical violence, sexual violence against women and girls and everyone else is a serious issue. It happens a lot. And as I started to grow in that, it just kind of started to set this path in my life. And to this day, might change tomorrow when I wake up, but I'm still really dedicated personally and professionally to trying and hit a tipping point of really working with men to be the whole human beings we can be, with a lot less, if not maybe none or close to none, violence in word and in deed. So I really get that a lot from Dad and from Mom, not only in what they went through, but in how they've dealt with it, and how basically we flipped the script in 2.5 generations. Looking at Ollie now is so meaningful to me. Looking at Matt and myself and seeing how we went from grandparents' generation to this generation of actively, concretely working against violence and preventing it, that to me is just mind-blowing and doesn't happen that often. So it's an honor to be a part of it.
Yeah, so in your individual and collective experiences, why is it critical for dads to speak out and take action to stop sexism, misogyny, and violence against women among their peers and wider community? Who wants to go first? You go, yeah, Matt goes first, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, it's hard to, I guess, in a way, if the question is, if I understand the question right, like about the importance of like activating our values and stepping into the kind of public sphere and the common good with what we're learning. I think it relates a little bit to what I was saying before, which is that I think the more that you live the life that you're that align with your values, and that the more that you can teach your sons and daughters, but your sons to walk in those steps and are conscious about what steps you're taking, that you can model kind of all these really important things about, whether it's bystander intervention or support networks or whatever it is, the more that you can normalize that, because there's going to be so much other messaging of what normal is for men and for boys identified. So I think that if it's not, we always talk about like a counter story in the work, but if the kind of violence and misogyny can be the counter story and always stick out like a sore thumb, because you're just engaged in either working against it or supporting other things, I think that's what I want for his heart, right? Like that's what I want him to grow up, not just with like values and ideas. I want him to feel how wrong it is to hate. I want him to feel, what his role is or what his role can be to stand against that. And I think that happens so predominantly with, talk is cheap to some degree. Like if you're not actively engaged on some level with the work, I don't know if it's as potent a lesson or, yeah.
Rich, what are your thoughts on this? Why is it critical for dads to engage with their peers and community about these issues?
Yeah, from my perspective, is maybe close to a typical, I hate to use that, but a typical guy born in 1949 in the Western culture. I experienced great violence and threat of violence from my father over the first 2 decades of my life. And that has influenced my entire life and my brother's. And looking deeper after several years of intense, wonderful therapy and other modes, I could understand a little bit more about the real difficult life that my father himself had, working 3 jobs, completely unsatisfied, turning to liquor, lots and lots of liquor, and taking out his frustrations on the people that he could blame who were the closest to him physically, which is not the people at work, not his friends, but his family. And a determination that I had really early on during pregnancy, my wife's pregnancy, our pregnancy together of Joe, then Matt. It was an unconscious understanding that became a conscious and is still becoming more conscious decision, which is my life. Many opportunities in my life have been cut short, or potential openings that could have been advantageous for me were closed by my experiencing such, great paralyzing fears and difficulties when I was young. And I don't want to bring another human being into existence perpetrating the same causes upon that little person. So I made an agreement with myself that to this day rings fresh and new and exciting, and I have to refresh it every day. And that is to not bring the worst that I'm capable, that I learned or is still lying dormant inside of me or inside of every man, inside of every man and every woman, which is we have the potential to be really animalistic or rageful at other people or hurt other people. We have the potential, I believe, and we have a deeper potential to be wonderful with other people, to be more than helpful, more than supportive, more than encouraging. In other words, ultimately to help your sons, your daughters, your friends, your neighbors express their best potential, but also to everybody. So that little tiny seed has been with me, and it has grown, and I've fallen down many, many times in it. And I remember the times I yelled at my boys or had a really lousy argument that came out of nowhere, as rage seems to do, but it doesn't. It comes from somewhere inside of us. It's not turning into another person. It's another side of us. And if we can find a way to develop our better senses, our better natures, our better heart, then I feel we have a glorious, a really wonderful future ahead of us as a species, as people, as dads. And dads can do it. If this poor schmazzola from the Bronx could raise two guys and in a better way than I was raised, then there's hope for everybody.
Yeah. You sound a little like Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu. He also grew up in a family where he watched his dad batter his mom very regularly. And I think someone asked him a similar question once, and he said that he made a conscious decision after seeing what happened to his mom to not do that to women and girls, and also to try to stop it. Stop other men from doing it, change the world. Yeah. And he's changed the world. He's really changed the world. There are a few comments before Joe answers. If you don't mind, I'll put a few comments on the screen. This is in reaction to what Rich said. So Ben Zeman said, Mr. Samalin, so sorry to hear you experienced violence at the hands of your dad. Good for you for being vulnerable about going to therapy. And it looks like you've coined a new catchphrase, Rich, because it is now a hashtag. Refresh it every day from KG9206.
KG.
Yes. And Marissa Gabriel says, living and growing to develop our better selves, heart. So Joe, what's your perspective on this? Why is it critical for dads to speak out and take action to stop sexism, misogyny, and violence against women among their peers and the wider community?
Because we need everybody to. This issue affects everybody, including dads. So dads need to step up. We need to step up because as dads, we perpetrate violence. And I say as dads, including myself, currently going through the process of adoption myself. So I don't know, I'm not a dad, but potentially soon-ish to be, we'll see. It's a very interesting, long process. But as dads, we perpetrate violence, we collude with those who are violent, we turn a blind eye to it, we minimize it, we ignore it, we make it invisible, we allow it in our name. One of the campaigns that I did with a college out in Indiana was, every year in the US, at the beginning of every college semester, you'll get some fraternity somewhere, not picking on fraternities, but this happens to be a fraternity specific thing, that you have some fraternity somewhere at the beginning of every semester that hangs a sheet spray painted off their fraternity house that says, hey dads, drop your daughters off here, referring to the first year women students who are coming in to the campus. And I always thought that was such a shout out to dads. That was such a, hey dads, I'm making you directly complicit in this, right? And there's so much that I think dads have the potential to do in so many different ways. And I can't say it better than Matt and Dad just did in terms of the potential there for really changing stuff and hitting a tipping point. So yeah, I think we need everybody, and dads very much included. What dads can do specifically as dads, we could talk for the next 10 years on that. And a lot of people are doing great work on that, and kudos to Pixels for doing this panel. But yeah, we need everybody.
Yeah, we can spend more than 10 years talking about every aspect of this, which is why Fathers for Pixels sessions probably going to go on for a decade or more. So let's get on with the big issues, or the small issues, depending on how you want to look at it. So teaching boys to respect women and girls and teaching them early is a crucial part of building a culture of gender equality and equity and stopping violence against women and girls. However, this is a challenging prospect for parents because many societies are still patriarchal with cultural norms that justify and enforce double standards according to the gender binary, one for boys and men and a different one for women and girls. So, Rich, what are some of the difficulties you have faced as a father when your attempts to teach your sons gender equality and nonviolence clashes with cultural norms for how boys should behave in themselves and towards women and girls?
Yeah, my wife was and is a painter, and I was a professional musician, and I'm still in the field of audio communications. So we weren't the typical household. We always had counter-cultural or extra-cultural people around and thoughts. So that question, I don't. We already had a kind of wider view, my wife and I, of inclusion, that we just more naturally had in. So the air in our family growing up was mostly wider. As I've mentioned, my own my own weaknesses of having narrow vision and a narrow heart toward other people, whether actions toward them or words toward them or to the TV about other people, whatever, is what I've had to personally work on. In other words, changing, which is an ongoing battle, an ongoing process, changing the way that I was brought up, the understanding of human life, of all people having remarkable abilities and beauties and potentials. So I think we kind of handed unknowingly and then sometimes knowingly a nice platter to each Joe and Matt, and to Joe and to Matt, and they took the platter and more or less they were able to develop themselves fully. And it's an ongoing development, but it isn't. I don't remember instructing either of them that these people are also people, and this woman, a woman, is to be. It just, in a sense, with failings occasionally, it was an open kind of an open field where these ideas could blossom, and they seem to blossom beautifully in both Joe and Matt, where they actually came back vocalizing and instructing me on the other side with the words that I still used or some ideas that I still had that would blurt out occasionally. So where you described the parent changing and teaching the children right and wrong issues and opening the children's eyes, there is the reverse effect, which is, in my case, in my wife's case, so strong and wonderful and ongoing. So we're a little different.
Yeah, we're a not typical household, I think, is the most true statement that I've ever heard uttered. Regina, am I allowed to ask a quick follow-up if that's okay? Okay, wasn't sure. I'm trying to think. Sure. I really appreciate that, Pop. I'm trying to think, and Matt, maybe you know, like, I'm trying to think what, if any, contexts of being with you, Dad, like at Filmus or some of the places you used to work, etc. Like, where were there any, if any, like kind of stereotypically hegemonic masculine kind of joking about women and the benign sexism stuff or the more serious stuff? I can't remember ever in a family context being around that too explicitly. TV, movies, etc., pop culture in general. But I can't picture that. And I appreciate what you said, Dad, about it going both ways, because that's what Grandpa is to me, right? So not to share your story, Pop, but as you started to kind of explore a little bit your childhood and what it meant for you as a person, as a dad, etc., deal with some of that stuff for the first time, etc., I know we broke off contact with Grandma and Grandpa, with your parents, for a while, and they weren't happy about that, to say the least. But a few years later, you wanted to reach back out and talk to your dad and explain what happened and reconnect with him. And in that interim, at that time, what, 60, 70, 80, 100-year-old grandpa, blue-collar, three-job having grandpa had gone to the library, the local library at the retirement community, and taken out every book on family violence and intergenerational violence and read them and showed up knowing that stuff. And to me, that is, I got goosebumps. I tell the story all the time. I still got goosebumps. But, you know, a lot of times you get the question, can men change? And I'm like, well, yes, they can. It ain't easy. Doesn't always stick, but we can. And I'm just trying to think in terms of that question, because I never thought about it, Regina, as much as I think about this. Like, were there pockets within our family, either family members or friends or work context? I can't think of any that were explicitly kind of overtly sexist or really kind of that kind of dominant masculinity. But I don't know. I can't remember any. I'm sure they were there, but.
But if there weren't any of those, I mean, this leads us to the next question, which, you know, if there weren't any, if you can't think of anything overt, you know, let's talk about everyday sexism. So everyday sexism is all the little microaggressions embedded in many, if not all, aspects of life in most societies, and may take forms specific to the culture. For example, in certain cultures, women eat separately from men after men have eaten, or women are not being allowed into public spaces, for example. So Rich, when you were raising Joe and Matt, did you feel that it's important to talk to both of them about what many people might consider normal or minor, or did you prefer to teach them about the big issues like domestic violence first?
Again, memory is a funny thing, but in my mind's eye, it was teaching by being. It was teaching through my actions more than my lectures. The three types of action, which is with your hands or with your mouth or with your thoughts, trying to analyze what I'm seeing in their behavior or in behavior in general, and then speaking about it when it's germane. But there are only a few times, and I don't even know if it was ever with Matt, because by the time Matt was a teenager, Joe had already entered into a whole world of beginning his life's career, whether full-time or part-time. It's never leaving him, of caring about other people. So it infected. It was a delicious, you know, we have viruses that kill us and scare us, and we have other kinds of infections that are marvelous. The infection of caring for other people. And I believe that is also can be contagious in a wonderful manner. And I don't remember ever having those kinds of discussions with Matt that his behavior sucked or was atrocious, or that he's, treating other people, whatever. I think naturally we have two young men here who somehow, maybe in an hour, we can't get to the root of it, but somehow have grown with their heads at the right tilt and being able to see far over the landscape and clear to see other people and more or less respect other people on a wonderful, marvelous level. And I do remember as a young father feeling, after hearing each of them speak about another person or problems they're having or good things they're having with other people, men or women, that, oh man, that's simply great. When I was their age, I didn't have that. It's so good to hear. I'm kind of having it, that realization, that feeling. I'm having it now, 20 years after I should have had it perhaps, but I'm having it now. Ain't it wonderful? Because I'm having it. So the time doesn't matter. The instruction is mutual, and the instruction is wholesome.
So, Matt, how about you? Have you thought about how you would approach these issues when Oliver is old enough for these conversations? Would you take the same approach as your dad?
Yeah, I don't think that I definitely would like to not have it just be like organically derived. I think there really is a place for explicit messaging and teaching and lessons. And I haven't, because he's so young, I haven't spoken with Bella, my partner, about kind of what we feel is appropriate in terms of timing. I do think, and this will just be kind of reinforcing maybe the same theme over and over, so I apologize, but like I was thinking back when my father was speaking about and what Joe asked, like where was I around kind of really either every day or, where was I around the microaggressions, where was I around the larger aggressions? And I can go back to at least my first memories of experiencing that outside of the family. Very much like I remember, sexism, racism, like I remember really experiencing those things very viscerally, and I didn't realize, but they're still with me today. And I think that does, I think the missing thing, if I'm really thinking about it deeply, that I want to be able to pass along, that I don't know if I felt at a young age empowered to do it, is I would feel really overwhelmed by these realities. And I think that part of whether it's kind of the larger issues like DV and all those really important issues to discuss, or whether it's the smaller ones, I kind of see it more about what do you do with the emotions that brings up, and what do you do with the reality of the real power imbalances in this world, whether it's patriarchy, whether it's white supremacy, what do you actually do about it? Not necessarily in like a problem-solving way, even though I think that's got to be there too, but that's the part that I think I would love to, and I don't have a good answer about how to do that yet. I think I'm going to hopefully rely on people who do this more for a living and things like that. But I do think that, we've been talking so much about like implicit messaging and like the waters that you swim in, and that those are really important ways. But yeah, there has to come a time where you're going to broach the more painful topics, because either you're going to do it or they're going to find out in other ways. So to kind of control that narrative.
Or both.
Yeah, or both.
I'll send you my consulting fees, Matt. I'm happy to start whenever you're ready.
Lay away.
What would y'all recommend to dads who are struggling to engage with sons on these issues? I mean, Joe, you've worked with many men and boys, and you've probably seen your fair share of dads struggling who might have brought this up. I'm struggling to talk to my kid about domestic violence. I'm struggling to talk to my kid about rape culture. What do you usually recommend to them?
So for context, I think it's important to recognize that some people are much easier talking. It's easier for some people to talk to family about these issues. For some people, it's much easier to talk to strangers about these issues, right? So we're all different in that. Some people it comes a little bit easier, some not. But I think if you're gonna have these conversations and you're gonna try and make a difference in your child's life, in anyone's life, especially as men, that we have to be ready to confront our current and our past and our future behaviors and actions that play into this, right? So I appreciate Dad talking about the 3 types of actions, right? Physical, verbal, and thought. And I think that's a good, simple way to sum it up. I'm going to steal that, Pop. Thank you. But we have to be ready to confront the stuff that we're doing. And one of the things I think that most helped with Mom and Dad raised us with the skills to look critically and to be the kind of people we wanted to be and to call stuff out when we saw it around us, whatever it was about. And they also have modeled doing that for themselves. And so like when I think about all the great things that we've been talking about that we got from you, from even Grandpa Pop, and from all these lessons, both implicit and explicit, I also know that you and Mom are very different in terms of emotional intelligence. Mom, love you to death, and she feels everything and says everything she feels. And Dad, it's like pulling teeth with you in a very, I think, kind of gender normative way has been my experience of it, right? That it's taken me a long time, and I'm still not there to understand how I feel about anger and confrontation. I do not like confrontation. I hate it. And I can't talk about when I'm angry very well still, and I'm 40 whatever years old right now. And so, I think we have to, as dads, as men, thinking about this, we really have to be able to confront our own stuff and be okay with the feelings that come up with that, whether it's guilt, whether it's shame, discomfort, that all, if you're doing it right, that stuff's going to come up. And as men, we're not always ready to sit with feelings, let alone deeper, hard feelings that are negative about ourselves. It ain't easy. And I still struggle with, I think Grandpa to Dad, to me, to you, Matt, not to speak for you, like, not taking care of ourselves, denying ourselves, putting everyone else and helping everyone else ahead of us to a point of self-sacrifice that is ridiculous. Like, to me, that's also a dominant masculinity thing. So I think the positive takeaways, Regina, to your question are, there's a lot of other dads struggling with this now and have in the past. You don't have to reinvent the wheel on stuff. Reaching out, talking about this with other folks, that's 90% of it, I think, for me. There are resources out there for help if you're struggling internally, emotionally, etc. But then also in terms of like, how the heck do we do this? One great recent new resource is Fathering Together. And I know they've done some work supporting Pixel as well, but check them out on Facebook. Hundreds of thousands of dads who just want to be better and do better and feel better. And so there's a lot out there, and we're happy to connect you all to resources. So be in touch. But I think being willing to, confront yourself and again, past, present, and current behavior, and be ready for the feelings with that. That's a key part of it, in addition to other concrete strategies and techniques.
Yeah, I'm going to share a couple of comments on the audience. They're not asking questions, but they're commenting while listening to y'all. So let's do this. So Lily P says, if I may, I also think Rich and other adults who spent summers with growing up were always direct, open, honest, and proactively educational from a young age around right and wrong behavior. And Biggs agrees, talking is hard. Talking is so hard. I mean, it is also, I'm Asian, everyone can see that. And in many Asian cultures, we don't, before we went on air, we were talking a little bit about Japanese culture, but in many East Asian cultures, there's so much in context. People don't really talk about it. And I think that sometimes that's really to the detriment of when it comes to parent-child relationships. and family relationships, because if you don't talk about something, it tends to fester, and it festers and it festers, and it could fester for decades, leading to a huge explosion at some point. Don't know any family that it hasn't happened to, families who don't talk. So to borrow a phrase from British Telecom, it's good to talk, but like Joe says, it's true. And like Joe said, it doesn't need to be with your own family, right? If you're more comfortable talking with your peer, if you're more comfortable talking with a friend, do that. But the most important thing is to talk, to discuss it. Otherwise, you're just gonna, the takeaway I'm getting from all of you is, if you don't talk about it and address it, you're just gonna keep going down that road. And the sooner you address stuff like this, the easier it is to correct course. So
Chris,
having said that,
can I just add one thing to that, actually? Oh, sorry, Dad, did you want to go?
Okay, Rich, what do you?
Yeah, thank you. I love the comments from everyone. Thank you. If I'm speaking to all of the dads directly and all of the future dads, what I'd like to say is the subject. There are three descriptive words that I think of, which is perpetrators and victims and survivors. If we could add, maybe for dads, for everybody, but dads, a fourth word, which is, how about builders? In other words, brick by brick, new light switch by new light switch, bit by bit, every day, adding a piece to the puzzle between you, Dad, and your kid, by being, especially in a moment, more honest, more warm, more encouraging about something with that son or daughter, or all of them. In other words, to build something better than you had yesterday, something better than you had a half hour ago, something better than you think you can do, step by step, trying to build a trust or build something, even if it seems hopeless, even if this seems that your child is already inculcated with certain ideas that are you see as negative or harmful. And even if you feel that way about yourself, if you take the extra time and energy to challenge yourself, and every day try to do something directly toward your son or your daughter, to bring them closer to a reality that is forward-looking, progressively encompassing life, rather than you did it, you're no good, or you got it and you're maimed. But even deeper than that, to be a really helpful human being, to reach out when it's not normal for you to reach out and do something, not just once, not once a month, not once a year, not on a birthday, but every day. Some one thing, a card, a this, a that, I don't have to spell it, but something, a talk, a hug.
Oh, and we have a comment following what you said. Love the builder analogy, step by step, brick by brick, patience and continuity. It's consistency, isn't it? It's role modeling is all about consistency. It's showing how to act every day, day by day. Oh, Matt, you were gonna add something.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, in light of all this, that I think, just going back to a little bit of what Joe was saying too, that it's really important when, for me, at least when I'm thinking about like stepping into the father role, to do so with a lot of humility. And that sometimes when I say like talking to, like I'm picturing like a lecture, when really I think what's most important is some of what Joe said, which is to be able to talk through not having the answers, to be able to talk through how it feels to experience all of these things around us. So just, yeah, to have that kind of humble point of view and really having a conversation when your children are able to, about how it all feels and making that kind of okay. Because I think as men and fathers, we're taught many times to have the answer and to jump into problem solving and doing that, when really a lot of this is just being able to process it so it doesn't go so horribly off course that you end up, you know, reenacting all of the messages around us and the lesser instincts.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, if I can, for the historical record, this person we've described today, my father, at age 50, took himself off alcohol without any outside assistance, though maybe with increasing threats from my mother. But he retired and took himself out of the realm of I'm an out-of-control addict, and wound up over the last 40 years of his life becoming about as loving a grandfather in many ways as people could want. It's still in the context of small-minded thinking most of the time, but he became a loving guy. In my realm of thinking and feeling, anything really is possible. Don't give up on anyone.
I'm so impressed. I am impressed that, you know, Rich, that your dad did that, because my mom's dad was an alcoholic, and he was a really abusive alcoholic.
Right.
And he never did that. You know, he went to his grave still verbally abusing my grandma. I mean, not in his last days, but, you know, when he had the energy to do it. So, but, and I think many more men just don't think about the patterns of behavior that they have, and they don't consciously try to change themselves. They gotta want to change themselves.
He blamed it on my wife and my Buddhist practice, but he of 50 years now, but he changed. He did change. My son's got a different dose of life and a different width and breadth of support from him than my brother and I could have ever imagined existed in that man. And lots is possible.
It's so, I really appreciate you sharing that, Pop, and the way you did, because one of the things, like doing this kind of work and talking with men, and we have to acknowledge that very often those different people that you explained, Pop, the person who chooses to commit different types of violence, the survivor, the victim, the witness, the child witness often, and the builder, very often that's the same person. Like, we know just statistically, professionally, that the majority of adult men who commit domestic violence, 85-ish% of them, depending on the study you look at, experience severe violence growing up. Like, we know that. That's 85%, which is a lot. It also means that it's not a genetic lock that if this happened to you or if you witnessed it, right? We don't want to put that idea out there. Right. But we do want to just be careful, because a lot of times it's easy for us to slip, not that you did this, Pop, but a lot of times it's easy for us to slip into like, oh, that's one of the good guys, that's one of the bad guys, and just othering. And then, of course, that brings in race, that brings in sexual orientation, that brings in identity, and all sorts of really crappy ways as well, and compounds it. It was just interesting to me. Like, I wanted to jump in, Dad, when you said, kind of, when you were saying like a different guy, a different grandpa, a loving grandpa. I always felt loving and care from him. And I'm not saying my experience is the same as yours, Pop, obviously. But like, I always thought and knew he was. I never doubted that dude loved the family, even though he acted like an a-hole. I'm trying not to curse today, sorry. You know, when he acted like really abusively and nastily towards grandma, towards whoever, and knowing all the stuff that you grew up with. But I think one of the things that makes this all so hard is so often this is the same person. And that's why it's, you know, behooves all of us just to try and improve ourselves and each other then, bit by bit, like you said, brick by brick every day.
So we've talked about, you know, male role modeling, and we've talked about dad's influences, and we talked about teaching by example. So how can fathers teach boys to stand up to peer pressure from their male friends, to behave badly or abusively towards their female friends and classmates? Anyone? Joe? Or Matt?
Matt's
the professional school psychologist. I feel like classmate bullying.
does this actually for a living. Yeah, that's a tough one. I think, I mean, the first question, so I feel like every answer is going to feel like a cop-out, but I feel really that when you said that, what was kind of activated in me is like, how do I teach myself, right? Like, to do a better job. You know, what comes up with me? Where do I fall short? You know, like, you know, where, and also not just the negative times of where do my successes come in and what propelled me towards them. And not to assume, again, if we're going to like show that humility, not to assume it's going to be the same experience. But if you can, you know, obviously there are modalities and people working on a more academic side and a more, you know, and maybe that would be helpful in that and supportive to kind of bone up on those things that people kind of activate to become good bystanders and to really interventionists and all that stuff. But I think just showing again through modeling that this is something that's not only okay, but this is one of our jobs as humans, is that we stand up for people. And that was part of we said earlier on that there was like a lot of implicit messaging. Well, this is where some of the explicit messaging came in for us, which I think had a profound effect, mostly from our cousin Heidi, who was mentioned before. But, you know, she would say, you know, basically, you know, you can't go to sleep until you can explain her mother used to say to her, like, you can't go to sleep unless you can explain one physical thing you did to make the world a better place today. Like, you have to. So every day it was kind of this training of, I'm going to be asked this question later, you know, I have to kind of get into it. And that type of kind of explicit messaging that it's not a choice in our life whether or not we help people who need help. That is our main function. That's why we're here. That's our meaning of life, is to rush in when we're needed. So I do think those kind of larger values of how to approach any situation where your intervention might be scary, but it's so needed. I think those are kind of and then, yeah, if you can bone up on like current research and what they say to do too is probably helpful, which maybe Joe can speak about, but I'm not sure.
Joe?
I'll just, I'll just add, having someone who, for the steps for engaging men around this, young men, old men, any men, I tend to approach it, though every context is different, I tend to approach it as, first you got to recognize there's a problem, because as men it's usually invisible to us. Invisible to us usually because we're closing our eyes, right? It's there. It's 2021. We have the interwebs. There's no excuse to not know that racism, sexism, et cetera, happen on micro to macro scale all the time at epidemic levels. There's no excuse. That doesn't mean it's easy to find out or it's an easy process, but it's a necessary one. And so I think we've talked about it a bit. I think for me, the one thing I'll say to this, out of the many answers there are, is to recognize the quote unquote smaller stuff. To some people, the catcalling every day, the cumulative effect of being harassed and threatened and sexually explicitly catcalled every day on the street for decades is a lot worse, more traumatic, more harmful, whatever it might be, than physical violence or domestic violence, right? There's no objective ranking of that stuff. And so some of the things we've talked about, the implicit benign sexism that we see every day and how that ties in to racism, homophobia, transphobia, and everything else, giving the critical skills to recognize that stuff and like dad and mom did with us, then expecting us to do something about it when we see it or hear it. I think that's the basis for it. I think that's one of the key foundations. So the critical skills to always have a critical eye towards yourself and internally and externally, at the individual level, the peer level, the community level, and the societal structural level. Building those skills, that's where you start. And as Matt said perfectly, you got to start with yourself too.
I mean, like it's like you said, it's the first thing you have to do that needs to be done is you need to know how to recognize what's happening, to recognize that is sexism, that is harassment, that is racism. And I'm just going to bring up the fact that they a recent headline that just came out. They did in the UK. They did a survey of school kids, and shockingly or not shockingly, that all of them are so used to, and mostly girls, are so used to sexual harassment that online and offline by their peers, the boys in their schools, that they don't even bother to report it. They're so used to it. It's so much of the background noise now. So when you get used to it, it becomes a little more difficult to recognize it and to stand up to your peers. And so let's talk about consent. We are coming up to the end of this session, so we can't leave the session without talking about consent. So understanding the importance of consent, especially sexual consent, is one of the most important conversations you can have with your sons or with whatever younger male person that you're mentoring. What would you suggest to dads and other male role models who do want to talk to their sons and young male mentees about consent, but have no idea where or when to begin? Rich, how did you do it with Joe and Matt? How did you talk to them about consent?
Did we talk about consent, Pop? I remember a few of the birds and bees talks. Those were fun and awkward and wonderful and beautiful and awkward.
I avoided all of those, for the record, successfully.
Actually, Matt, we had a talk.
Boom.
I remember. I know the talk you're talking of.
And drove up and down the block while I explained certain things to you that you knew 10 years prior. But
I was 28.
There is no time to do this adequately. We'd need another 2 hours. But when Matt was 11 and Joe was 14 and a half or 15, we had a cataclysm event in our family. And that is my wife, who we have not mentioned, began having nightmare remembrance dreams, memories from her heretofore unknown, 100% unknown, but maybe suspected horrendous abuse as a 3-year-old and onwards by the members of her family, ongoing for 10 years and more. The effect of that in our family, we're mentioning it now, helped shape my understanding of, number one, how to fight for your partner, no matter what has happened to her or him, how to support your partner and love your partner 1,000,000%, no matter what. And two, how to share the truth of our experiences with our young teenage boys. And our decision, stemming from my wife, was to be open and honest completely. And how much that helped shape their initial anger, as my anger took 30 years to begin to quiet down against those perpetrators. But but how much it helped to shape Joe and Matt's thinking and strong thinking on this subject for themselves. Only they can really answer, but the proof is in the pudding, how they've lived their life through their teenage 20s and 30s is quite wonderful and respect-worthy. So in one sense, a horrendous event has yet blossomed that we didn't bring the worst of that, as sexual violence can perpetrate further sexual violence against the next generations again and again. That didn't happen. And the opposite happened, that we raised two fighters against this particular type of horrendous activity. And that's my wife's legacy, one of her legacies, that she should be very proud of, and she is. And I just, at the last seconds of this, I just wanted to bring that in quickly to, and quietly, to just shine a spotlight on Matt and Joe and the extraordinary nature of their love and support of other people, is in no short manner derives from both my difficulties in my family and my wife's difficulties in hers, yet the turnaround, the story, the poison into medicine, as it were, or poison becomes medicine. Poison is medicine itself, is an extraordinary, and I feel very grateful that we've been able to so far experience this and share it in the manner that we did.
I appreciate that, Pop. I just want to say one thing at the same time, and I usually say this as a safety thing when I have these conversations. We don't want to assume anybody, because it's easy to do because of the nature of the world we live in, that someone who talks like this about these issues, someone who professionally works on these issues like me, is any less likely to commit sexual violence, domestic violence, stalking, street harassment, etc. Even people in this field and this field of kind of pro-feminist ally men's engagement, we still have the same levels, if not sometimes more levels, of these types of violence. So Absolutely. Just because I might have, Men Challenging on my business card or the website doesn't mean that I'm safe, a good guy, perfect, whatever language we kind of want to use. And in that context, I'll say that I appreciate everything you said, Dad, and agree with it. And at the same time, I struggled in college respecting no. And as I was starting to lead my first workshops on consent and, anti-rape stuff, etc., as a college student on a college campus, I was also not respecting boundaries with some of the women that I dated. And I was feeling pressure, and it felt totally unconscious to me. I didn't realize it until after, when I got called out on it, right, by some of the women I dated. And so I just want to put that out there and own that, because I think it's a really important piece to hold on to in terms of safety, if nothing else, and accountability.
Okay, so we have a question from the audience. I think I found it. The question is which relates to that, is from Misty306. How do you explain incels to your sons? What can we do to prevent them from using that excuse for their behavior?
I mean, I really appreciate the question, Misty306. I put a comment or two in there, and happy to talk more offline or in a different context. But I think one key thing is that, for me, in my experience, that kind of extreme thinking around sexism and misogyny and violence against women isn't something totally alien or foreign to the mainstream sexism out there. So it's a much more specific, concrete, extreme, violence-inspiring type of it. But I think that othering incels, demonizing incels as the problem, and not putting it on a spectrum that we're all sitting on, can be problematic. So I'm not saying give them the same respect you do everybody. I'm not saying that. You decide that for yourselves. But I think it can also, especially talking with young men and boys, if some of the stuff that's being said by incels, et cetera, is clicking with them because we're all raised in sexism, shutting that down, demonizing it, etc., can also really shut down being critical, right? Creating space for yourself and developing those critical skills. So it's an important question, but I think that we want to be intentional with how we address it.
And speaking of parents having talks about consent, Lily P brings a really good point. She says, I remember watching the movie What's Love Got to Do With It, which is about Tina Turner's journey from victim to survivor as a 10-year-old. And my parents then talked to us about what happened in the movie and consent, among many other times. So that's another way to do it. I think there's so many tools out there, and I'm going to say the Pixel Project has a look every year. I think for the last 10 years, we've compiled a list of movies and documentaries that you can watch about violence against women every year for the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. We also have an annual list, 16 books to read about violence against women. It could be fiction, it could be non-fiction. We're coming out with a book anthology this year about a charity anthology this year where the Twilight Zone meets Promising Young Woman. So all the abusers get their comeuppance. But there are lots of materials out there for dads to use as well, right? I mean, if you're not comfortable talking about, I mean, am I right, Joe? Like, if you're not comfortable talking directly with the kids about it, then maybe reading a book together or watching a movie together like Lily P and her parents did might be a good jumping off point for talking about stuff like this. I mean, I did it with racism when I teach. So so the class I teach English. So we did To Serve With Love, which also has a lot of some sexism in that. So we talked about that. And now we're doing To Kill a Mockingbird. And of course, we're talking about racism and anti-Blackness and sexism and all of that. So that's my 2 cents. Matt, do you have anything to add about talking to kids about consent and relationships from your point of view as a school psychologist?
Yeah, it's something that I'm actually, I went from working with like young children to working with college age students right now for this year. So it's something that's come up a lot. And what it feels like, whereas the kind of pillars of what consent means, obviously that doesn't change day to day or moment to moment, but how consent, what forms of consent are most appropriate to the people. So consent is not really a monolith in terms of an activity. I've had a lot of conversations this year about how even getting affirmative consent for some people felt like pressuring. So I think to have kind of an open mind towards where your children are and their community and stuff like that, and to really understand the different ways that consent can look and feel over time based on kind of cultural cues and things like that. But that the bedrock of it really is still, I don't think consent is necessarily a hard conversation in and of itself if it's born out of already the foundation of values that you've already set of not harming people. If you're attuned to that, people can make mistakes, but if you're truly attuned to not trying to harm people as a stance, then consent should flow out of any other conversation you would have about not harm. It's like that meme that went around about the tea. If you take it out of the sexualized context, it seems very logical to not force tea on somebody. So, and in that same regard, if you're living love and support and helping people, then it would be anathema to some degree to be doing things that you're not sure people want done. So obviously it's much more complex than that, and we have tons of messages as men to go for things and to so there's tons of all this messaging. I would say I like the idea of using tools, media, things like that are specifically for it, and also just to you could do it with anything. You could go online and look at different advertisements and talk about those, right? About what are the messaging to boys and girls. You can, if seeing scenes of sexual assault is too much, for certain people, like there's just so many ways that you can kind of point out issues of consent and respect if you really have your eyes open to it. So I don't know, taking an hour a week and going through those things at a young age, things like that, I think can be successful.
Sorry.
Sorry. So Big says, yes, it's such an important point that consent isn't a hard conversation if it's within the context of do less harm. Or I would like to say do no harm. Try the do no harm thing. So Google did fail at that, didn't they? The do no harm thing, but you can try. I think it's like Rich said earlier. It's an everyday refresh, everyday thing. You have to constantly be mindful of all of this. So Joe, what were you going to say?
I'm just going to make a point from kind of the work aspect. There's a lot of focus on consent education right now. It's kind of one of the big new things, along with bystander intervention training, in trying to do prevention work around gender violence in different forms. I think one of the things that I've seen just in my personal perspective is that we're focusing a lot on the how. Like 99% of it is the how to do consent, how to ask for consent, how to navigate sex and sexuality with consent. And we are not talking about the why nearly enough. And because we haven't hit a tipping point of actually valuing women and LGBTQ folks and trans folks yet, without that why, I don't know how effective just the how can be. Because if I have no impetus to ask or care about a yes or a no, then I can check all the boxes and show you I know how to do it, but I'm still not going to do it, or I'm going to set up situations where I don't have to do it, or where it's such a gray area, right, that there's no accountability anyway. And so I think really focusing on valuing women, valuing the voices of women, and all the other things that we try to do has to go hand in hand with the how to teach, or the teaching of how to consent. We have to have the why. We have to have the why in there. I'm not saying no one's doing it. I'm just saying from my point of view, it needs to be much more of a focus.
Okay, so we're running out of time, so we need to wrap up. So one last question for everybody. Do you have any particular tips or suggestions you would like to share with dads and dads-to-be who want to raise feminist sons? Rich.
Sorry, I muted myself. Find out where your son is. Find out who your son is. It may be your desire for your son. Is it his? Is it his right now? How can you approach the subject in a manner that it isn't like a sledgehammer doomed to hit and even hurt or be dodged, and your son push your son further away than into other behavior? If you show that you respect yourself and you respect other people, then respect your son. Respect what your son is capable of doing good in his relationships, and proceed from that perspective, that you want to help your son. And then ask yourself the question, before you open your mouth, Confucius did say, think 7 times and then maybe speak, if you're sure of what you want to say. And then you can maybe proceed, and you'll know a little bit more about the best way to proceed, rather than just, well, I had this on my mind, and how do we help you, not treat your girlfriend that way? Or how are you treating your girlfriend? Or there's a way to approach that is doomed to failure, more ways than not. And there's a way to probably approach what you want to find out and how you want to help that's hidden somewhere inside there. So try to find the best way to approach and assist your son, because your son needs you. And it's on you to find the way to reaching.
Right. Matt?
Yeah, I think the best way is to be a great feminist and to be a great father. I think there's a very, 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 very potent magical reaction that happens, especially with children, when they attach to people. They also really oftentimes attach to their values and who they are. That's what actually makes my son, who's a little over 1 now, this such a, at times, fraught time, because he's developing relationships with people, deep relationships, and I'm always wondering, like, well, what do they believe? What could they just, even, as we've been saying, like, implicitly pass along? So I think, there's a lot of active lessons and teaching that you can do, but if you, again, are engaged in the work, if you're engaged in making the world a better place, and you show that child love and compassion, as my father was saying, that that will marry. That will marry.
All right. So Joe, any final words?
Do the work. Own when you mess up. Listen. Feel your feelings, and keep going. Don't get stuck. Just keep trying to be a little bit better every day, yourself, and then it's going to happen organically, even if you're not trying to sell it.
Okay.
Brick by brick.
Oh, by the way, Rich, everyone in the chat box, they're doing hashtags of some of the phrases that you. So here's an example.
About time.
That's unmute. Unmute yourself. Rich Samalin bringing the hashtag game. And then Lily going, oh my God, yes. Unmute yourself. You know, Joe, we should do this. We should do this in Twitter.
I like it.
Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, you know.
It also plays into the whole thing of like men and husbands and dads always controlling the remote control on TVs. Maybe that's just me, but I've been thinking a lot about masculinity and remote controls. I like it.
Yeah, and not just that. I mean, people have been on Zoom for the last 15 months now, so everyone knows what unmute means, right?
Unmute.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, okay, so before we wrap up, Joe, do you have anything? Does MenChallenging have anything coming up in the next 3 months over the summer?
Right now, we are finishing up a fundraising campaign. You can see it on the website, MenChallenging.org, supporting an incredible local grassroots with international reach organization called Stop Street Harassment. There's a lot going on around street harassment we're not talking about because there was a lot of lockdown, but Holly Curl, an incredible activist over at Stop Street Harassment, has been doing incredible work. We're trying to support her. Right now, they started the first ever crisis support line for people who've been street harassed in the US. And their initial budget for that as a national crisis line was about $200, and it jumped up to about $1,500 now. So they really need the help and support to support folks directly affected by this. So right now we're doing that, in addition to trying to support you all at Pixel Project and do some of our own stuff to get men more engaged as well.
All right, so before I do the wrap up, here is also, so hashtag count rich has 12 hashtags. Two. And Matt has 2.
Did I really have 2? I think that's a stretch.
Can I send one in for Matt?
Pity hashtag.
So, excellent conversation, Samalins.
Thanks, Pam.
Yeah. And I just wanted to point out, not to be a downer, but Confucius himself was a pretty big chauvinist.
Oh,
pretty big sexist. He was responsible. Just a quick history lesson to everyone here before we go. Confucius, some might argue, was responsible for stratifying the Chinese family. So we have very, very set roles with set titles in the family, and women were often left off the family tree. So I found out about this when my dad went to China, came home with the family tree, and I'm like, where are all the women's names? Oh, you're not there.
Wow.
So before Confucius, apparently it was, I mean, I might be wrong. Any Chinese historians out there, please correct me, but Before the Confucius, there were a lot more matriarchies and a lot more room for women.
Wow.
I
will not quote him in the future.
I mean, he has some good points, but you know, there are a lot of things that he brought into the culture that weren't very good for women.
Or quote him and explain the context, Bob.
Gotcha.
Yeah. All right. So here are a few resources that everybody can use if you want to continue learning more about the role of dads and men in helping stop violence against women. So you can find out more about violence against women if you're new to this topic, and what you can do about it by visiting the Pixel Project's website at www.thepixelproject.net. We have a lot of one-page 101 introductions to the different types of violence against women, because it's not just domestic violence, it's not just sexual assault and rape, it's also everything from female genital mutilation to child marriage to street harassment. We have these resource pages there. We also have checklists for everyone who wants to help their friend. And you can find out more about the Fathers for Pixels program by visiting http://bit.ly/dads for pixels. So the 4 is the number. And to learn more about MenChallenging's work, visit www.menchallenging.org. Now, everyone, thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you so much to the Samalins for being with us today. And thank you, everyone, for putting up with me while I'm having my cold and the occasional cough that broke through the mute button. But everyone, have a really good weekend, and I hope that you will share this video, which is being recorded on the YouTube page that you're on now. Share it with the dads and the men in your life. Get the conversation. Remember, everyone, remember what we said just now about like using movies and books as a jumping off point? You are very, very welcome to use this video that we're all recording here as a jumping off point. So have a good evening or good day wherever you are in the world.
Thank you, Regina.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.